Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Board Game Blog number 4. This is for May 9th, 2013. Today I'm going to talk about worker placement games. Recently on Board Game Geek and some other places on the internet there's been some discussion about what a worker placement game is or isn't, and I thought I would just make a little video about it and give you sort of my perspective on it. Now, from a sort of basic, abstract, mechanical sense, worker placement games are when you take a pawn and you put it somewhere on a board and you get resources or take an action. I think most games categorized as worker placement on Board Game Geek fit that category, but I think those are not worker placement games. There are some worker placement games that are classified as such, and I think they are correctly classified as such. So I'm going to go and give you 5 games. That seems to be my number 5. So I will do 5 games that actually are worker placement games and really take that genre and do something a little bit more with it, but also stay strict to that worker placement idea. And then I'll quickly cover several games that are classified as such that are not worker placement games, given the criteria that's going to be sort of revealed through these 5 games. So the first game on this list is Zoeken, the Mayan calendar. This is a new game from last year. In this game you're going to have little pawns. You're going to place them in various areas on these wheels, and then every round those wheels are going to rotate, and then more actions are going to become available to that worker as they sort of rest and reside and sort of maybe build up some skills, or just take the time to do whatever they're going to do. So one of the places that you can place them is an area where you can actually build a building. But you can't just place the guy there and then magically poof, a building happens. There actually is a time element and sort of almost a physical, work exertion idea here. You put the worker down, it's going to take him a little bit of time to get to the point where, something is going to come out of it, whether he gathers up corn or wood or actually builds a building or whatever it might be. So these are actual workers. They're not just things that you're just, choosing actions with. You actually have them, you put them somewhere, and then you got to wait a little bit of time, and then whatever process they may do is actually going to arise in some kind of beneficial activity for you. So Zoeken actually breaks from that whole idea of denial and action selection. So most of the worker placement games, you put something down, it's like, I have it. It's mine now. You may get it next round or a couple of rounds afterwards, but it's mine now. In Zoeken, it's not necessarily like that. You put the guy down, and yes, the physical spot on the board that you place the guy is taken up for now, but somebody else you could place ahead of the guy and still get access to the previous spot in Zoeken. Or you also have the idea of you just have to wait a little bit. You can put the worker down, and 9 times out of the 10 you're not going to take the action that you just put the guy in. You are usually going to wait a little bit. So in some senses it kind of breaks the traditional mold of worker placement by just boom, take it, I took it from you, haha. And the whole thing with worker placement. This one has that extra elements that I'm talking about here that make it really like a worker doing something. The next game on this list, and it's actually my favorite game of the 5 that I'm going to talk about, so these aren't really in necessarily any particular order, is Kahless. Now Kahless has a lot of other elements. It's also kind of known as the first worker placement game, and I don't know if that's true or not. There's Bus and Cathedral and some other earlier implementations that came out beforehand, but it's sort of cited as sort of the spark for worker placement. This one, you have a track that you're going to be placing workers on in various buildings, and also a possible castle spot where you can go and take certain batches of goods to help erect the castle. Now in this, it has that denial action of, I took this building, you can't take it, or I got to the castle first, so I'm going to get more points than you. But you've also got sort of a physicality that's happening here. So you're going to put the workers on different spaces, and then the more and more buildings are going to come out down the track. So not only is the castle going to be built up over time, but the surrounding area that's sort of supporting the castle being constructed is going to happen. It kind of reminds me of sort of like a gold rush or an oil boom, where you have sort of a focal point and a rush to get lots of money and prestige, and then a town kind of builds up around it. You can actually see that happen on the board, which is really cool. So you also have to pay these workers. You've got to pay them a coin at least every time you pay them. So they actually are sort of working for you. They're hired contractors, if you will. So this has those other extra elements there's a thematic integration here. I know a lot of people like to say Kahless isn't very thematic or very pasted. It has a very pasted on theme. It has a very sort of rote traditional, we've seen it in the 100 Times Building a Castle theme. but it actually mechanically is very thematic. You see the town grow, you see the castle get bigger in a sense, you know, the workers sort of have different skill sets. You get different, you know, buildings of your own where somebody has to come and pay you a little bit of, or you get a little bit of a benefit from them using your buildings and things like that. So it's not just action selection. You actually have a physical board, you have all these things that are happening, and it is a very thematic game. And I'll argue that to death, that if you don't think Kahless is thematically tight, then, you know, whatever. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's like, I think it's very thematically tight. There's a lot of things happening here. And there's a reason that guy's frowning on the box, too. There's a good reason. The next game on the list is Lancaster. And in this game, you have workers of sort of various characteristics. They're basically knights. You have ones that are level 1 up through level 4. And they're going to contribute in different ways. You have some places sort of in the countryside that you can put them down to go to a certain region or fort or castle or whatever to either kind of recruit a nobility that's there and bring them back to sort of your side, or have them do some kind of special activity. You've also got a war area where you're going to send them and to contribute against the war on France. So it also has the characteristic of, you know, the bigger knights, the level 4 knights will knock the level 1 knights out of their spot. So you don't just deny somebody the action because, you know, that's what's there. You can put a guy down and then have somebody else come in with a bigger knight or a knight with some little squire tokens to move them out. So there is, again, there's a physicality there, or it's almost like a war game in a sense, or a more thematic game, where, you know, you're actually doing a little bit of battle. There's some physical confrontation there that's happening, not just I took this because I took it first. You know, there actually is some other elements there to the conflict besides first in, you know, last out kind of thing, or first in, first out, whatever. But so this has that extra layers there, and again, that kind of goes with the theme. Now this game has a lot of other aspects to it. There's voting and kind of a blind bid auctioning and other kinds of things, but it's still very much a worker placement game, and really kind of takes that to sort of that next level beyond just pure action selection. So next on the list is AlRashid, and it's kind of in the same vein as Lancaster, where you have workers of various strengths. So you've got the lowly merchants, which are just little discs, all the way up to, you know, the big Pasha tokens. And so you've been placing these workers all over the board, probably in the cities a little bit, and then also in the countryside. And again, it's not so much about action selection as it is exerting your influence in different areas on the board during different key times of the game. So again, you're not denying somebody just taking the action and taking it from them just to do it. You have to sort of decide which, you know, areas are important to you and where you're going to, you know, throw most of your influence in the game. And from a sort of interesting thematic sense, you have these sort of faceless workers. Yes, there's various, you know, strengths of them, but in this game you're going to recruit title characters, actual, you know, physical character cards with, you know, a little caricature on them to sort of enhance and specialize your family. In the game, you're kind of known as a family of folks, you know, trying to win the game and exert your influence the best. So you have these faceless workers that you're, you know, putting your influence with, but then you're sort of specializing and giving a face to your, you know, your techniques and your skills and whatever you're going to be trying to do in the game with these, you know, actual characters that you can kind of point and name and say, you know, this is what, you know, my specialty is, my strategy is for the game. So again, it's beyond just action selection. It's got a lot more thematic sort of grease and integration into the game itself. So the last game I'm going to use as sort of a jumping off point to talk into some of the ones that don't make the cut. This is Lords of Waterdeep, and the idea is that you have these agents, sort of a spy network sneaking throughout the city to go and gather folks, to go on quests for you, to undermine the other players and sort of manipulate and kind of rise to power in Waterdeep in a sense. So this one is very traditionally, you know, the action denial idea. And I think that makes sense here, because if I was going to the Thieves Guild to grab 2 thieves, then you shouldn't be there, you know, right along with me. That wouldn't make sense for the kind of the story of the game. That wouldn't make no sense at all. That we're both standing there side by side, you know, sneakily, you know, getting the same thing. You would be far away from me. So that, I think that idea works here with the action denial, and it makes sense with the theme of the game. So moving into some of these that maybe are close on the cut, and I just kind of put a cutoff point here. And so I'm going to talk about Agricola first, which it's very close because you have a family. It's physical. Your family is going to grow. As your family grows, you're going to get more people, around you to do different actions and capabilities. But like the whole idea that I can go to the, family growth spot and then nobody else can go there. Well, that doesn't make any sense. How come I can have babies and you can't? Or how come I can go fishing and you can't? That doesn't make sense. So that really breaks down, and it becomes more just feeling like a pure action selection idea. And Agricola is a lot more about the cards anyway. But the worker selection part, worker placement part of it, kind of breaks down for me there. But that's, that one you can just kind of debate and, argue abstractly and sort of use your imagination as why, only one person can do, one thing. Now it has some other nice thematic elements of, you've got to feed your people and sort of survive. And that sort of idea of having these little pawns, these little workers, they have to actually live, they're a physical thing, and it's not just a pawn that you're using to choose an action. This is a person you're putting there. So that kind of aspect of it, argues against me keeping out of the list. But again, the whole idea of like you can have babies and I can't, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so the next one that was close to making the list, and probably even more than Agricola arguably could be added to the list, would be Manhattan Project. Now this one, again, you've got different types of workers. You got the scientists, the engineers, and the regular people. You've got actual physical buildings that you're building in your little nation area. You've got some, spy capabilities and things like that to go and, actually move it into other people's nations and things. But that center board is a little bit, weird. It's just kind of like action, 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 action. And I do this one, this one, this one, this one. And this one's a little bit better than the other one. But, oh, you got there first, so I go to the other one. That moves it more out of the physical worker idea. But again, this one is really close, and I just decided to cut it at 5 games for whatever reason. But you can definitely push Manhattan Project into, at least push to make an argument that it is actually, a worker placement game as I'm sort of, defining it here. So let's talk about a few that are just in no way, shape, or form worker placement games. And that's anything with a dice. So you've got Kingsburg, Alien Frontiers, Bora Bora. Those are not worker placement games. Those are dice management manipulation games. Yes, there are action spaces that you're putting these guys, and yes, they're supposedly spaceships or whatever. But no, as soon as you roll dice, for me, a lot of times anyway, theme goes out the window. So a lot of thematic games have dice rolling, and that's not thematic. But maybe for battles. But like that's pretty much it. As soon as you roll dice and put it on something, Bora Bora, whatever, Castleberg, I don't know that that's classified as worker placement, but not thematic, not worker placement. It's just dice manipulation, and I love Bora Bora to death, but not a worker placement game. It has that sort of idea, but when I think about making the cut here, it's I'm just putting a 1 on there to screw everybody. That's not like a special worker or anything. That's not a physical person that I'm doing. It's just purely up here, left or right brain or whatever. It's abstract. I'm jacking you. I'm taking this from you, and that's it. And then Alien Frontiers and Kingsburg. Alien Frontiers, you could kind of argue because you have sort of the spaceship idea that the die is a spaceship or whatever. But no, I mean, once you start getting into the game 5 minutes, then it's not like that. It's just, I'm just manipulating dice to just do the best for myself. So anything with dice so far does not really feel worker placement-y to me, at least given this criteria. A couple other ones, let's see, Dominant Species and Venos, not worker placement. I mean, you have that right-hand side with these action pawns. I think they're called action pawns. And you just put them up and choosing different things randomly to just do different stuff on the board. There's no worker placement in that game at all. So, fine enough game, but not worker placement. Venos is another game that's very thematic, I think, for sort of the order that you have to do things and sort of, developing your wine. Not worker placement though. There's a grid in the middle and you shift them around, and what the heck is that thing? You're just shifting this thing around, choosing actions. It's more like Puerto Rico roll selection, but just kind of inverted, and it's I think I called it a 3D rondelle. So instead of this a rondelle, you have this sort of twisted thing where you have to jump around, and it's really neat, but it's not worker placement, and it's classified as worker placement. So also, none of this is a big deal. This is not going on Board Game Geek, and I'm geeking out about a friggin' board game mechanic. So, but feedback is fun, and that's what I like to do, talk about board games. So anyway, that's just some ideas there. The only last 2 I have on this list is Stone Age and Spikerstock. Stone Age kind of falls in that same thing of having the physicality. You're kind of like almost betting a number of workers. So am I going to put 3 workers on wood or 4 workers on wood and then try to get it out? there's some breakdowns there. Stone Age is a great game, but you have the cards coming out and the random buildings that are just like, I'm going to put these goods in for points. You know, it kind of breaks down somewhere, so it kind of knocks it off the list. But that one, you could argue there is a physicality there as you grow your family, and you need more workers to get you a better shot at getting resources. So that one kind of falls into that category as well. Spikerstadt's a little bit weird because it has workers, and you're going in and you're sort of artificially increasing the demand of something, but the physicality thing is odd. I mean, they don't really seem like workers to me. They're just little pawns that you're just putting in. Like, okay, I kind of demand this too, so the price goes up. You know, that's, to me, is not worker placement, even though they're little people. Not worker placement. So anyway, this is another fun exercise one to sort of think about worker placement. And an idea, you know, in some senses for people, you know, if you're designing a game or you just like to think about this stuff like me, is when you make a worker placement game, I think there's some room here to sort of maneuver and make it, you know, kind of evolve that sort of design mechanism a little bit. Kind of maybe exploring more the physicality and the spatial proximity and the time aspects of Zoeken and things like that. Into, you know, there's some room there to grow the thing instead of just, you know, saying, oh, I'm going to have some actions for people to select. Because you see, I mean, there's a ton of games on that list that are probably just bad games, but you know, I'm just going to select stuff, and that's going to be my worker placement game, and I'm going to throw worker placement on the box cover just because I think that'll sell games. Don't do that. I mean, really think about, like, what am I actually doing here? Is this a worker? Who is this worker? You know, what are their motivations in life? And, you know, what characteristics do they have? You can bring in some of those light RPG elements just to be sort of pedantic and stupidly academic about it. You know, think about the RPG elements of what the worker is, what do they mean, what kind of power should they have, things like that. So anyway, those first 5 games I think exemplify it to a good degree. And so there you go. There's the blog for the week. Thanks.